The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit at the bare skin of her wrists and a voice that whispered of endless winter through the cracks in the stone walls. Alara knelt on the floor of the great hall, the rough stone biting back through the thin fabric of her trousers. Her hands were raw, chapped red from the harsh lye soap and the icy water in her bucket. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low. In the Ashwood Pack, that meant she was less than a shadow. She was the dirt they wiped from their boots, the chill they cursed in the morning, the empty space at the table no one ever noticed. Her task was always the same: scrubbing. The floors, the hearths, the laundry stones down by the frozen creek. Her world had shrunk to the ache in her back and the burn in her knuckles. A heavy boot kicked the side of her wooden bucket. Icy, greasy water sloshed over the rim, soaking her trousers and shocking her skin with a fresh wave of brutal cold. She flinched, curling into herself. "Filth," Lyra snarled. Lyra was the daughter of the Pack Beta, all sharp smiles and cruel eyes. She stood over Alara, her fine, fur-lined boots immaculate, a stark contrast to the spreading puddle of grime. "You missed a spot. Are you blind as well as useless?" Alara did not look up. Looking up was a mistake. It invited more. She kept her eyes fixed on the gray slurry of water seeping into the stone, her heart hammering a dull, familiar rhythm of fear against her ribs. "My apologies," she whispered, the words barely a puff of white in the frigid air. "Apologies," Lyra mocked, her voice dripping with contempt. "That's all you're good for, isn't it? Apologizing for the space you take up, for the air you breathe." Alara gritted her teeth, the pressure a sharp ache in her jaw. She would not cry. She had promised herself that years ago, after her parents were lost to the red fever and she had been cast down from a respectable family to this. Tears were a currency she could not afford to spend. They only bought more scorn. She reached for her rag, intending to sop up the spill. Lyra's boot stomped down on her hand, pinning it to the freezing floor. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up Alara's arm. A small, choked gasp escaped her lips. "Pathetic," Lyra said, grinding her heel down. "My father says the Frostfang is coming. A storm to scour the mountains clean. Perhaps it will finally scour away the Pack's weakest link." She lifted her boot, leaving a muddy print on the back of Alara's hand. Alara pulled her hand back, cradling it to her chest. The skin was already bruising. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the wave of despair that threatened to drown her. It was a familiar battle. The cold outside was nothing compared to the cold inside, the gnawing emptiness of being utterly alone. She pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. She would not break. Not here. Not for Lyra. That small, stubborn spark of defiance was all she had left. It was a tiny, flickering ember in the vast, frozen wasteland of her life, but it was hers. Later, as the sky outside turned a bruised purple and the wind began to howl, Lyra found her again. The first flakes of the prophesied storm were beginning to fall, thick and heavy. "Omega!" Lyra called out, her tone falsely sweet. "I have a task for you." Alara's stomach tightened. Nothing good ever came from that tone. "The healer requires Winterbloom for his potions," Lyra continued, holding up a small, empty pouch. "The kind that only grows on the high ledges of the Widow's Peak. With the Frostfang coming, he'll need it for the lung chill." It was a death sentence. The Widow's Peak was treacherous on a clear day. In a budding blizzard, it was suicide. Everyone knew that. But the storm, Alara managed, her voice trembling. Lyra's smile was a razor's edge. A strong back is all an Omega is good for. Surely you are strong enough for a little snow. Go, now, or you'll answer to my father for refusing a direct order. There was no choice. Refusal meant a public whipping, or being cast out into the storm anyway. At least this way, there was a sliver of a chance. A fool's chance. She took the pouch, her bruised hand throbbing with every beat of her terrified heart. She did not have a proper cloak, only a threadbare woolen shawl that did little to ward off the cold. As she stepped out of the hall, the wind sliced at her like claws, stealing the breath from her lungs. The world was a whirlwind of white. Snow blinded her, stinging her cheeks and catching in her lashes. The path was already disappearing, the wind screaming a song of doom. Every step was a struggle against the growing drifts and the force of the gale. What was she even doing? This was not survival. This was a slow, deliberate execution. Lyra's face, smug and victorious, flashed in her mind. She would die out here, and they would call it a tragic accident. Another worthless Omega, gone. She reached the base of the peak, the rock face a dark, jagged shadow against the swirling snow. Her fingers were numb, her face a mask of ice. Hope was a distant memory. She began to climb, her raw hands searching for holds in the frozen rock, her body shaking uncontrollably. She found a small cluster of the pale, bell-shaped flowers clinging to a ledge, their petals dusted with snow. Winter bloom. They were real. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat. She had actually found them. She reached out, her fingers clumsy with cold, and plucked the delicate stems, stuffing them into the pouch. As she turned to begin the perilous descent, the ledge beneath her boots groaned. A sickening crack echoed, lost in the howl of the wind. Then, there was nothing. The world dissolved into a sensation of falling. Wind screamed past her ears, her stomach launched into her throat. White snow and black rock spun in a dizzying vortex. This is it, she thought. A strange sense of calm settling over her. This is the end. She closed her eyes, waiting for the impact that would shatter her into oblivion. It never came. Instead, she hit something hard but yielding. An arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist, crushing the air from her lungs. The fall stopped so abruptly it felt like a second impact. She was dangling, suspended over the abyss, held by a strength that felt impossible. She dared to open her eyes. She was looking up into a face carved from granite and fury. It was a predator's face, harsh and beautiful, framed by a mane of black hair dusted with snow. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were silver, like the heart of the storm, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that burned through the blizzard. He pulled her upward with effortless ease, swinging her from the void and onto the solid ledge beside him as if she weighed nothing. She landed against a chest as broad and unyielding as a mountain. The sheer heat radiating from him was a shock, a furnace against the Arctic cold. It seeped through her wet clothes, chasing the chill from her very bones. She scrambled back, falling onto the snow-covered rock, her mind reeling. Who was he? No one from her pack had this presence, this raw, untamed power that saturated the air around him. He took a step toward her, his movements fluid and dangerous. He was massive, built on a scale that dwarfed any man she had ever seen. A thick black fur cloak was thrown over his broad shoulders, and even in the raging storm, He seemed utterly unaffected by the cold. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. The silver eyes tracked her every trembling movement. He raised a hand, his fingers long and calloused. She flinched away, expecting a blow. It was the only touch she had ever known from those stronger than her. His hand stopped. A flicker of something, confusion, pain, crossed his harsh features. He moved again, slower this time, reaching for the arm she had thrown up to shield her face. His fingers brushed her wrist. Fire. A bolt of pure, white-hot energy shot up her arm, straight to her heart. It was not a burn of injury, but of creation. A blinding light erupted behind her eyes, and for a second, the screaming blizzard, the cold, the fear, it all vanished, replaced by a singular, overwhelming sensation. Connection. She felt a sudden, dizzying flood of emotions that were not her own. An ancient, crushing loneliness that stretched back centuries. A jolt of pure, disbelieving shock. And a wave of possessiveness so fierce, so absolute, it was terrifying. She cried out, snatching her hand back as if burned. She looked down at her wrist. There, on her skin, a mark was forming. Fine, silver lines swirled into existence, glowing with a soft, ethereal light before settling into the shape of a snarling wolf's head, its form intertwined with a radiant sunburst. It was a brand, a claim. Her head snapped up. She looked at him, her heart pounding with a new and terrifying rhythm. His eyes were no longer silver. They were molten gold. They glowed with an inner fire, pinning her in place, seeing not just her, but into her, into the deepest, most hidden parts of her soul. His lips parted, and he spoke a single word. His voice was a low growl deeper than thunder, a sound that vibrated through the rock and into her bones. Mine. Fear was a cold, sharp thing, but this was different. This was primal terror, the kind a mouse feels when the shadow of the hawk falls over it. Her mind screamed at her to run, to flee, to disappear back into the storm that had almost claimed her. But her body refused. Some deep, instinctual part of her, a part she never knew existed, leaned into his presence. It craved the impossible heat of him, the sheer power that rolled off him in waves. It recognized him. What was happening to me? He stood, pulling her to her feet with a gentle but firm grip on her arm. The contact sent another jolt of warmth through her, less shocking this time, more like a current of liquid heat settling deep within her. He wrapped his massive fur cloak around her narrow shoulders, enveloping her in his scent. It was the smell of pine, of winter storms, and of something else, something wild and uniquely him. The warmth was intoxicating. For the first time in years, the ache in her bones began to recede. "You're her," he murmured, his golden eyes scanning her face, her tattered clothes, the bruise on her hand that Lyra had left. His gaze lingered on the fresh mark on her wrist, and the gold in his eyes intensified, burning brighter. "After all this time, you're her." She didn't understand. Her teeth were chattering, partly from cold, partly from shock. Who are you?" she whispered. A strange, almost pained expression crossed his face. "I am Kale," he said, his voice softer now. "Alpha King of the Northern Clans." The title hit her like a physical blow. The Alpha King. He was a legend, a myth whispered in hushed tones around the fire. The ancient, immortal ruler of all the shifter packs, a being of immense power, said to have a heart as cold as the glaciers from which he ruled. And he was here. He had saved her. He had marked her. No, she breathed, shaking her head in denial. It was impossible. A mistake. You're wrong. I'm no one. You are not no one, he growled, the sound vibrating through her chest where she stood tucked against his side. He tilted her chin up with one finger, forcing her to meet his blazing gaze. You are my mate. The words made no sense. His mate? The mate of the Alpha King? She was Alara, an Omega. The dirt beneath Lyra's boots. Her mind couldn't bridge the chasm between those two realities. It was a dream. A hallucination brought on by the cold as she lay dying at the bottom of the ravine. He seemed to read the disbelief and terror in her eyes. His expression softened further, the harsh lines of his face easing into something that looked almost tender. I have you, he said, the simple words carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow. The storm is no place for you. Come. He did not wait for an answer. He swept her up into his arms as if she were a child. Alara gave a small cry of surprise, her arms instinctively going around his neck. The sheer power in his embrace was staggering. He moved through the raging blizzard as if it were a mild spring breeze, his long strides eating up the ground. She buried her face against the fur of his cloak, overwhelmed by the heat of him, the solid, steady beat of his heart against her ear, the impossible reality of the situation. He was taking her away from the peak, away from the storm, but he was not heading back toward the Ashwood Pack. He was moving deeper into the mountains, toward his own territory. Panic flared anew. Wait! She pleaded, her voice muffled by his cloak. My pack! You have no pack, he stated, his tone flat and absolute. Your pack is with me now. His fortress was a thing of impossible scale, carved into the very heart of a mountain. It was all black stone and sharp angles, a place of brutalist beauty that seemed to have been forged by giants. Torches burned in high alcoves, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts. Despite the stone, it was warm inside, a deep, radiating heat that came from the floors themselves. Kale carried her through vast, echoing halls, past guards who bowed their heads low, their eyes wide with shock as they saw the small, bedraggled woman in their king's arms. He did not stop until he reached a set of massive wooden doors. He pushed them open with his shoulder and entered a suite of rooms that were larger than the entire great hall of her former pack. A fire roared in a cavernous hearth, its light glinting off polished wood and rich tapestries. He finally set her down on a thick fur rug before the flames. Her legs felt weak and she swayed, her head spinning. Sit, he commanded, his voice gentle but leaving no room for argument. He guided her onto a plush chair, the soft leather a luxury her skin had never known. She just stared at the fire, watching the flames leap and dance, trying to process the last hour. From freezing to death on a cliffside to being in the private chambers of the Alpha King. From a worthless Omega to his mate. The silver mark on her wrist seemed to throb in time with the firelight, a permanent, unbelievable proof. He disappeared for a moment, returning with a tray laden with food. There was roasted meat, still steaming, fresh bread, cheese, and a goblet of what smelled like mulled wine. The aroma made her stomach ache with a hunger so sharp it was painful. When was the last time she had eaten more than scraps? She looked from the food to him, her eyes wide with confusion. Eat, he said, his golden gaze unwavering. Hesitantly, she reached for a piece of bread, her movements stiff and uncertain. She half expected him to snatch it away. He had moved to stand by the fire, one hand resting on the stone mantelpiece. The light played over the harsh planes of his face, softening them. "No one will harm you." The sincerity in his voice was a balm to her frayed nerves, but her mind, so used to betrayal and pain, could not fully accept it. This had to be a trick, a game she did not understand. "Why?" she asked, her own voice sounding small in the vast room. "Why me?" He turned to face her fully, and the loneliness she had felt from him during the bonding washed over her again, a palpable ache in the air. "I have been alone for 500 years, he said, his voice raw. "Our bond is a thing of fate. It is not a choice. The moment I touched you, I knew. My soul recognized yours." He crossed the room and knelt before her chair. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it, avoiding the bruise. His touch sent a shiver of warmth through her, a feeling that was both terrifying and wonderful. "This mark," he said, his gaze fixed on her wrist. "It declares you to all the world. It declares you to me. You are the other half of my soul, my queen." Queen? The word was so absurd she almost laughed. Her? A queen? A queen of dirt and servitude, perhaps. She pulled her hand away, curling back into the chair. "I can't be," she whispered, shaking her head. I'm nothing." The self-loathing that had been her constant companion for years rose up, thick and choking. She was broken, used, unworthy. How could this being of immense power and ancient lineage ever be bound to someone like her? His face hardened, a flash of anger in his golden eyes. But it wasn't directed at her. "Who did this to you?" he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Who taught you to hate yourself?" She flinched, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "It's just what I am." "No," he said, his voice absolute. He stood, pacing before the fire like a caged wolf. "What you are is mine, and what is mine, I protect." The fury rolling off him was a physical force, making the very air tremble. "The Ashwood pack will answer for this, for every wound, for every tear." The thought of Cale descending on her former pack filled her with a complex mix of dread and a dark, shameful flicker of satisfaction. Days bled into a week. Alara lived in a state of suspended disbelief. Cale was a constant, steady presence. He gave her beautiful, warm clothes. He made sure she ate. He spoke to her, not in commands, but in questions about her past, his voice gentle as he slowly drew out the story of her lonely, painful life. He never pushed her. He never demanded anything. He would simply sit with her by the fire, his presence a warm, protective shield. For the first time, she began to relax. The perpetual knot of fear in her stomach began to loosen, thread by painful thread. One evening, he brought her a mirror, a full-length pane of polished silver. She stared at the reflection and for a moment did not recognize the woman looking back. Her hair, washed and brushed, shone like dark silk. Her cheeks had a healthy flush. The clothes she wore, a simple but elegant gown of deep blue wool, fit her perfectly. The haunted, starved look in her eyes was still there, but it was softer now, muted by a sliver of nascent hope. But the hope was fragile. One afternoon, a delegation from the Ashwood pack arrived at the fortress gates. Lyra was with them, along with her father, the Beta. They demanded an audience with the king, claiming one of their Omegas had gone missing during the storm. Cale met them in the great throne room. Alara, hidden in a shadowed alcove above, watched with a pounding heart. "She was sent on an errand and never returned," the Beta said, his voice full of false concern. "A tragic loss." Kale sat on his throne of black stone, his face an unreadable mask. An errand? In the Frostfang? What errand could be so important as to risk a life? Lyra stepped forward. The healer needed herbs, my king. The Omega was eager to prove her worth. Alara saw the lie for what it was, a poison dart aimed to secure her death. From his vantage point on the throne, Kale's gaze flickered upward, meeting Alara's in the shadows for a fraction of a second. A silent communication passed between them. Then he looked back at Lyra, his eyes turning from their calm silver to a dangerous, simmering gold. Your concern is touching, he said, his voice dangerously smooth, but unnecessary. The Omega you speak of is under my protection now. He lifted his hand, and with a gesture, the doors at the side of the hall opened. Alara, taking a deep, steadying breath, stepped out of the shadows and walked to his side. A collective gasp went through the Ashwood delegation. Lyra's face went white with shock, her jaw dropping. Her eyes flew from Alara's clean, well-fed appearance to the Alpha King sitting on the throne, and then they saw it. Alara had pushed up her sleeve. The silver mark of the wolf and sunburst seemed to pulse with a faint light on her wrist, a stark, undeniable declaration. Lyra's shock curdled into pure, venomous hatred. Her gaze was a physical blow. She understood. She understood everything. In that moment, Alara knew that Lyra would not let this go. She had not just survived, she had ascended, and for that, Lyra would never forgive her. The delegation was dismissed, sent away with cold fury and threats of retribution from the king. But the damage was done. Lyra had seen the mark. The secret was out. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Lyra's hatred was a tangible thing, and it would find a way to strike. Weeks passed. Kale was preparing to make a formal announcement to all the northern clans to present Alara as his mate. It was a politically delicate situation. A low-born Omega with no lineage or standing as the mate of the Alpha King was unheard of. There were whispers, challenges from other powerful alphas. Kale was often gone, dealing with these political fires, leaving Alara in the heavily guarded safety of his fortress. But she felt his absence like a physical ache. The bond between them was a living thing, a warm current that flowed constantly when he was near. When he was gone, there was a dull void, a constant low-level hum of anxiety. It was during one of these absences that the blow fell. Alara was in the library, a vast, circular room lined with ancient scrolls. The scent of old paper and leather was comforting. She was finally starting to feel a sense of peace, of home. The fear was a distant echo. That was her mistake. A sudden, unnatural cold swept through the room. The torches flickered, their flames turning a sickly green. Shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to coalesce. From those shadows, figures emerged. They were cloaked and masked, moving with a silent, eerie grace. They wore the sigil of a black flame on their chests, the Ember Covenant. Fear, cold and familiar, seized her. She tried to scream for the guards, but a hand clamped over her mouth, another grabbing her arm. She struggled, but they were unnaturally strong. One of them held up a chain made of gleaming silver. The moment the metal touched her skin, agony erupted through her. It was a searing, icy fire that attacked the bond mark on her wrist. The warm connection to Kale was instantly severed, replaced by a screaming void of pain and emptiness. Her nascent strength vanished. She went limp, a cry of pure agony muffled by the hand over her mouth. They dragged her from the room, moving through hidden passages in the fortress walls she never knew existed. An inside job. Someone had betrayed them, betrayed Kale. She was bound in the silver chains and thrown into the back of a covered wagon. The world was a blur of pain and jarring motion. The cold was back, worse than ever before, because now it was inside her. It was the absolute absence of Kale, a soul-deep wound that felt fatal. They traveled for what felt like days, deep into a blighted, twisted forest where the trees grew like skeletal claws, reaching for a sick yellow sky. They brought her to a crumbling fortress, a place of dark, oppressive energy. She was thrown into a damp, lightless cell. The silver chains were shackled to the wall, keeping the agonizing void in her soul wide open. She curled into a ball on the filthy straw, shaking, the pain a constant, grinding torment. This was worse than the Ashwood Pack. This was a despair so profound it felt like the end of the world. The door to her cell creaked open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the dim torchlight from the hallway. He was clad in black armor, a shadowy helmet obscuring his face. "The little Omega," a smooth, chilling voice said. "The Alpha King's weakness." He stepped into the cell. He was the source of the oppressive energy she felt, a being of profound darkness. This was Morthos, the Shadow King, the leader of the Ember Covenant. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble," he said, circling her like a shark. "Kale has been distracted, searching for you. It has made my work so much easier." "What do you want?" Alara rasped, her voice hoarse from disuse and pain. Morthos laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "What every king wants, my dear. More. Kale's power is tied to the ancient lines, to the soul bond, a bond I intend to sever. Permanently." He crouched down, his helmeted face close to hers. "There is a ritual. It requires the mate to be present. The bond is a bridge I will use to pour my power into him, to poison him from the inside out. When the bond shatters, it will not just cripple him, it will kill him. And all that power, his throne, his kingdom, it will be mine." Ice flooded Alara's veins. He was going to use her to murder Kale. The thought was more painful than the silver chains. "He will find you," she spat, a spark of her old defiance flaring through the pain. "He will kill you." "Let him come," Morthos said, standing. "He is walking into my trap. And you, my dear, are the bait." He left her in the suffocating darkness. Despair crashed over her, a black tide. She was a tool again, a weapon to be used against the one person who had ever shown her kindness. The weight of her own worthlessness pressed down heavier than ever. Morthos was right. She was a weakness. Her existence would be the death of him. Tears she had held back for years finally fell, hot and silent on the cold stone floor. She was at her lowest point, broken and alone in the dark. She was going to die here, and worse, she was going to be the cause of his death. She closed her eyes, trying to remember his face, the warmth of his hand, the gold of his eyes. She focused on the agonizing void where the bond used to be, pouring all her will, all her desperation into that empty space. A silent scream for help, a final hopeless prayer. "Kale." And then, a flicker. It was faint, like a distant star in an endless night, a pinprick of warmth in the soul-freezing cold. Through the pain, through the silver's dampening effect, she felt him. His rage was a towering inferno, his despair a mirror of her own. He was frantic, tearing the world apart to find her. She reached for that feeling with all her might, clinging to it like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. And he felt her. A single thought, not a word but a feeling, a raw and powerful projection of will, slammed into her mind. It was his voice, his essence, cutting through the darkness. Hold on. The connection was tenuous, fragile, but it was there. I am coming. Hope, fierce and desperate, ignited in her chest. It was a painful, beautiful thing. He was coming. She just had to hold on. The ritual began at dusk. Alara was dragged from her cell and taken to a large, cavernous chamber. A twisted altar of black, obsidian-like stone stood in the center, carved with dark, jagged runes. Morthos stood waiting, his shadowy helmet replaced by a crown of twisted, blackened iron. His face was sharp and cruel, his eyes holding a fanatic's gleam. She was forced onto the cold altar, her arms and legs shackled. The silver chains bit into her skin, the pain a constant, nauseating thrum. The Ember Covenant cultists chanted in a low, guttural language, their voices echoing off the damp stone walls. "The moon is ascendant," Morthos declared, his voice ringing with triumph. He held up a wicked-looking blade, its edge glowing with a malevolent purple light. "The bond is ripe for the harvest. Soon, the reign of Kale will be nothing but a fading memory." He loomed over her, the tip of the cursed blade hovering above the soul bond mark on her wrist. She could feel the dark magic emanating from it, a corrupting force that made her very soul recoil. This was it. She squeezed her eyes shut, sending one last, desperate thought across the bond. "Kale, I'm sorry." As Morthos brought the blade down, a sound like the world splitting in two tore through the fortress. The entire north wall of the chamber exploded inward in a shower of stone and dust. Framed in the breach, against the dying light of the sky, stood Kale. He was no longer the gentle man who sat with her by the fire. This was the Alpha King in his purest form, a being of absolute wrath. His eyes were not gold, but blazing white fire. His body was half-shifted, claws extending from his fingertips, his face elongated into a bestial snarl. A low, terrifying growl rumbled from his chest, a promise of death to all who stood before him. Behind him, his warriors, the elite Winter Guard, poured into the room, their howls of rage joining his. The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of violence. The clash of steel, the snarls of shifting wolves, the screams of the dying. It was chaos. Kale moved like a blur of destruction, a force of nature unleashed. He carved a bloody path through the cultists, his eyes locked on Alara, on the man standing over her with the blade. Morthos hissed, shoving one of his lieutenants toward the rampaging king. "Hold him! I just need a moment!" Kale was intercepted by Morthos's elite guard, monstrous shifters wreathed in dark energy. He fought them with savage fury, but they were many. They swarmed him, their dark magic clashing with his raw power. Alara watched in horror as a cursed blade slipped past his guard, slicing deep into his side. He roared in pain, staggering back a step. He was faltering. For the first time, Alara saw the ancient, powerful Alpha King as vulnerable. They were overwhelming him. Seeing him hurt, seeing him in danger of falling because of her, something inside Alara did not just break. It shattered. The years of pain, of being called worthless, of being invisible and abused, it all coalesced with the terror of losing him and the ferocious, protective love she now realized she felt. It became a singular point of incandescent rage. A dam inside her soul burst. It started as a low hum, a vibration from the very center of her being. The silver chains on her wrists and ankles began to glow, not with the cold fire of their own magic, but with an intense, internal golden light. They grew hotter and hotter, until with a deafening crack, they exploded into molten droplets, freeing her. A wave of pure, golden energy erupted from her body. It was not a violent force, but a profound one. It washed over the chamber in a silent, luminous tide. It did not harm Kale's warriors, but the cultists screamed as it touched them, their dark magic dissolving like smoke in the sun. The light washed over Kale. His wounds steamed and sealed shut before her eyes. The fatigue vanished from his form, replaced by a fresh surge of immense power. He threw his head back and let out a triumphant howl as he tore through the last of Morthos's guard. Alara sat up on the altar. Power, glorious and terrifying, coursed through her veins. It was the warmth of 1,000 suns, the life force of the earth itself. It was her power. It had been there all along, dormant, waiting. She slid off the altar, her feet landing softly on the stone floor. Her eyes, once the color of a winter sky, now glowed with the same golden light as Kale's. She turned her gaze to the stunned Shadow King. Morthos stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What are you? You're just an Omega, a worthless stray!" The word worthless no longer held any power over her. It was a relic of a life that was no longer hers. She lifted her head, and her voice, when she spoke, was not a whisper. It was clear and strong, ringing with an authority she had never known. "I was," she said, taking a step toward him. The floor around her feet began to glow. "But now, I am his." She raised a hand, palm open. "And he is mine." She closed her fist. A concentrated beam of pure, searing light, the essence of a sunbeam given physical form, shot from her hand and struck Morthos square in the chest. He screamed, a high, unearthly sound as the light consumed him, incinerating his dark magic, his ambition, and his very being until nothing was left but a pile of blackened ash and a twisted iron crown. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the ragged breathing of the victorious warriors. The battle was over. Kale rushed to her side. He stopped just before her, his eyes wide with awe, scanning her form, the light that still clung to her like an aura. "When I saw you fall, you saved me," he said, his voice raw with gratitude. "You saved us all." He looked down at her wrist, at the soul bond mark that was now glowing with a fierce, steady light. "He called you my weakness. He was wrong. You are my strength." His words healed the last of the broken places inside her. Strength. Not worthless, not a burden, strength. She reached up, her own hand covering his. She looked him in the eye, her fear gone, replaced by a love so profound it was an anchor for her soul. "And you are mine," she said, her voice full of conviction. She was not just a passive recipient of this bond. She was an active part of it. She was claiming him, just as he had claimed her. As she spoke the words, a brilliant light flared between their joined hands. The sunburst on her mark blazed, and from it a line of silver light flowed, wrapping around his hand. When the light faded, a new mark was emblazoned on the back of his hand. A perfect, gleaming silver wolf. The twin to the one on her own wrist. The bond was complete. Two halves, now whole. They were bound, not just by fate, but by choice. The journey back to the mountain fortress was a blur. Alara rode with Kale, held securely before him on his massive steed. She leaned back against his solid chest, the steady beat of his heart a comforting rhythm, the warmth of the bond a constant, joyful presence in her soul. She was no longer cold. She wondered if she would ever be truly cold again. When they arrived, the entire populace of the citadel was gathered in the vast central plaza. They had heard of the victory, of the destruction of the Ember Covenant. They stood in silence, their faces a mixture of curiosity, awe, and suspicion, as Kale dismounted, then lifted her down. He did not let go of her hand. He led her through the crowd, which parted before them like the sea. They walked to the steps of the great hall, turning to face the thousands of shifters assembled there. Kale raised their joined hands, showing the matching marks that glowed with a soft internal light. His voice, amplified by his alpha power, boomed across the plaza, clear and absolute. "You know me as your king," he began. "For centuries I have led you. I have fought for you, and I have been alone." A murmur went through the crowd. "No longer," he declared, his golden eyes finding Alara's. The love in his gaze was a tangible thing, a warmth that enveloped her. "The fates have answered. The ancient prophecies are fulfilled. This is Alara. She is the other half of my soul, the fire to my winter, my mate." He paused, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power. "She is your queen." He squeezed her hand. For a terrifying second, she looked out at the sea of faces, powerful alphas, fierce warriors, ancient families, and the old fear, the old feeling of worthlessness tried to whisper in her ear. "You don't belong here." Then she felt the steady warmth of Kale's hand, the unshakable strength of the bond, the quiet hum of her own power resting within her. She was not that girl anymore. She would never be that girl again. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met the gaze of the crowd. She let them see the light in her, the strength Kale saw. She was not just an Omega who had gotten lucky. She was the woman who had incinerated the Shadow King. She was the mate of the Alpha King. She was a queen. A lone warrior at the front, the captain of the Winter Guard, dropped to one knee, then another, and another. Within moments, the entire plaza was kneeling. A wave of acceptance, of loyalty, of awe, washed over her through the bond, amplified by Kale's own fierce pride. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Welcome home," he murmured. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of pain or despair. They were tears of overwhelming joy. She looked at the kneeling crowd, at the towering mountain fortress around her, at the magnificent, powerful man standing beside her, his hand holding hers as if he would never let go. She was not invisible. She was not worthless. She was seen. She was valued. She was loved. She was home.